What's good, YouTube? Welcome back to Hall of Boxing, where I bring you all the latest boxing news, fighter reviews, and all the controversy going on in the sport. If you like that kind of content, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and turn on the notifications. Alright, so in today's video, we're going to be talking about Terence "Bud" Crawford. He had just sat down in an interview recently, and he admits that Errol Spence Jr. is a bigger draw than him, and claims that if he were to get the same kind of opposition, the same caliber of opponents as Errol Spence Jr. is getting, then he would be just as big of a draw as Errol Spence Jr. So as we all know, WBO champion Terence "Bud" Crawford and IBF and WBC champion Errol Spence Jr. have been going back and forth for some time now, for some years now actually, about seeing who's the best welterweight champion out there. A lot of people think it's Errol Spence Jr. A lot of people think that it's Terence "Bud" Crawford. Terence "Bud" Crawford is possibly, arguably, the top pound-for-pound fighter in the world at the moment, excluding any division, just in the world, after Canelo. You know, some people exclude Canelo due to him testing positive for the performance-enhancing substance that he said he got in eating cow meat in Mexico. But, you know, Terence Crawford feels like he is just as big of a draw as Errol Spence Jr. and says that if he would have had the caliber of opponent as a Mikey Garcia, for instance, this is the only one that he actually mentioned. So Mikey Garcia and Errol Spence Jr. fought a few years ago back in Dallas, Texas, and they pulled in 47,500 buys from the gate, and they did 360,000 plus pay-per-view buys. So Terence Crawford has done 2 pay-per-views since he's been with Top Rank. And that first one was against Victor Postal when he unified his 140-pound title. So the gate buys for that were 7,027, and the pay-per-view buys were between 50 and 60,000. And Crawford also fought against Amir Khan on pay-per-view, and his live gate buys were 14,100, and he did considerably better in the pay-per-view buys and did 150,000. So, you know, that's not, you know, very much when you're looking at the fight that Terence Crawford compared and said that if he was the opponent of Mikey Garcia in this fight, he would have done the same numbers, which those numbers for the Spence-Mikey Garcia fight, they did, again, 47,000 buys at the gate and 360,000 pay-per-view buys. So you can put both of Terence Crawford's fights into that, and you'll still be able to fill up seats and get more and have more pay-per-view buys. So, Terence Crawford said that, again, if he was that opponent of Mikey Garcia's, then they would have done the same numbers. And he also went on to say that Mikey Garcia has a huge fan base in Dallas, which he does. I'm not from Dallas, I'm from Texas, but I am a fan of Mikey Garcia, not more than I am of Errol Spence, but I'm a fan of Mikey Garcia. I like the way he fights. You know, that was a good matchup. If Mikey Garcia wasn't so small, that would have been a better matchup. But anyway, so he says that Mikey Garcia and his fan base pulled in more numbers than Errol Spence, and it wasn't Errol Spence who was the star power for that fight. It was due to Mikey Garcia that they did those type of numbers. So again, that's the only fight that he mentions. But if you guys know, which you all should, Errol Spence Jr. went on to fight on pay-per-view in his next fight against Showtime Sean Porter. So Terence Crawford claims that it was Mikey Garcia who did those type numbers, but then we go back and we have to look at the Sean Porter numbers, and in that Sean Porter fight, there were over 300,000 pay-per-view buys, showing that it wasn't just Mikey Garcia that did those 300,000 in the prior fight with Errol Spence. Errol Spence has some sort of star power because he did over 300,000 buys there as well. Now, I'm not saying that Sean Porter isn't a big draw. I don't believe he's as big of a draw as Mikey Garcia in Dallas, because, you know, the Hispanics in Dallas, the Latino community, they love Mikey Garcia, as they should. He's a great fighter. But Sean Porter doesn't bring in that kind of star power. So the fact that we're still doing over 300,000 pay-per-view buys with Sean Porter instead of Mikey Garcia is saying something about Errol Spence, and it's kind of contradicting what Terence Crawford has to say, being that he's not that big of a draw and it was Mikey Garcia doing it. He failed to mention that Errol Spence went on to do 300,000 pay-per-view buys with Shawn Porter as well, and he also failed to mention the Errol Spence-Danny Garcia fight that was also in Dallas, and it did 16,000 buys at the gate in the pandemic when seats were limited. So if they would have opened up the Arlington Arena, the Cowboys Arena, more, then he would have done more buys. He filled up what he could have filled up in that stadium with Danny Garcia. Now you can say Mikey Garcia has a huge fan base in Dallas, and Shawn Porter's a big draw as well. He was the WBC champion at the time. But Danny Garcia doesn't have a big draw in Dallas. I mean, I'm not saying he's not a star, but he's not a huge star in Dallas. So they did 250,000 pay-per-view buys in the pandemic, and they did 16,000 buys at the gate. Again, Terence Crawford fought in 2 pay-per-views prior to that, and he did about 210,000 pay-per-view buys combined with about 21,200 people through the gate. So 21,000 is better than the 16,000 in the Danny Garcia fight, but again, that Danny Garcia Errol Spence fight was limited seating due to the pandemic. But the 250,000 plus pay-per-view buys from the Spence Danny Garcia fight is still more than both of Terence Crawford's fights put together. So anyway, now, I'm not saying that Terence Crawford couldn't be as big of a draw as Errol Spence if he didn't have the same caliber opposition, but he's not fighting the same caliber opponents. Now, when it comes to the argument of why Errol Spence and Terence Crawford hadn't fought yet, and who's ducking who and what, it came out that Errol Spence wants either 60-40, which I believe is fair, or 70-30. You know, if he gets another belt, then that's fair as well. But I believe 60-40 is fair, but Terence Crawford says that he wants it to be 50-50, or he's not even going to consider the fight. But out of his own mouth, he's admitting that he is not fighting the type of opposition that Errol Spence is fighting, saying that that's the reason he's not a big draw, as big of a draw as Errol Spence. And I, have to put that on the shoulders of Bob Arum. Now, this is similar to, Bob Arum has made some statements about Terence Crawford not being a big money draw, needing to wait his turn, this and that, the third, to try to, prolong and keep making his money off of him while he's holding Terence Crawford's career up, is what I feel like he's doing. I feel like if Terence Crawford wasn't with Bob Arum, I believe he would be getting better fights. He'd be getting promoted better. I don't see how the PBC, but I don't see how Top Rank is not promoting the man when they're with ESPN. As you see, if you guys are college football fans, you can see how ESPN backs the people they have their TV media deals with, such as the SEC. They back the SEC, and that's really all you talk about, is pump the SEC up to a level where they're gods in football. This is the same level that Terence Crawford should be, because he is that kind of talent. It's like a Floyd Mayweather. When Floyd Mayweather was with Bob Arum was saying the same things about Floyd Mayweather. Oh, he needs to wait his turn, his time's coming, he's not as big of a star as he thinks he is, this, that, and the third. But as soon as Floyd Mayweather leaves Bob Arum, he blows up into a stardom of like astronomical, unprecedented, level. So, in my opinion, Terence Crawford needs to leave Bob Arum. Bob Arum is not looking at his best interest, and it's making him look bad, in my opinion. So he admits that he hasn't fought the same caliber of fighters as Errol Spence. In my opinion, showing that Errol Spence was absolutely correct. He has carried most of the weight in the welterweight division, which is where they're going to be fighting. We're not looking at what Terence Crawford accomplished at 140, which, in my opinion, his resume at 140, even though he unified the belts, the caliber of fighters are not near a Danny Garcia, a Mikey Garcia, a Shawn Porter, damn near not even a Lamont Peterson. I know Errol Spence beat the brakes off Lamont Peterson, made him look all washed up. But, Horn, I think Lamont Peterson would have gave Horn a run for his money as well. I don't see anybody on Crawford's resume that stacks up to the last 3 fights that Errol Spence took. So anyway, guys, you guys let me know what you think. I think if they are gonna fight at this moment, Errol Spence does deserve more money due to the fact that even Terence Crawford saying that he hasn't fought the level of competition. Errol Spence holds multiple belts. Terence Crawford only holds one. Hopefully Terence Crawford leaves Bob Arum here in October or November, whenever his contract ends. But we'll just have to wait and see. I think that'll make a lot of fights easier to make for Terence Crawford. If he slides over to the PBC, which is where all the welterweights are, all the best welterweights, not all of them, but most of the best welterweights are, then he'll be able to, match up with these fighters, and we can really see the level of competition. Because, we're only talking about Errol Spence, but I think Sean Porter gives him a very good fight. I think he beats the brakes off Danny Garcia, but I think it'll be a good step up in competition for him, even to Danny Garcia. But anyway, y'all let me know what y'all think. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. I appreciate you watching. Until next time, y'all take it easy.